Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to talk about the Southern Baptist Convention. We're going to talk about the newest hill that the Southern Baptist Convention wants to die on. And guess what? They will die on this hill because this hill is kind of an important commandment out of the 10, and they want to die on the hill of redefining adultery. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've done a lot of written content about this. I've done a lot of video. I've at least done one other video on the Southern Baptist Convention and Jennifer Lyle. Jennifer Lyle is a woman who is 26 years old, so she is older than my wife. When she started having a consensual sexual relationship with a seminary professor, and over time, over the course of 12 years, they had an ongoing secretive sexual relationship that ended when she was 38 and a Lifeway executive. She has since been paid $1 million by the Southern Baptist Convention. That's with, the tithe money that you give the SBC, that Granny writes to her church, to her Southern Baptist church. That tithe money went towards her getting paid for being a hoe. And the Southern Baptist Convention wants to die on the hill of defending the survivor status of Jennifer Lyle. They have gone through extraordinary lengths to defend her reputation, not as an adulterous woman, but as a survivor of sex abuse. And what evidence is there that she actually did survive sex abuse? Well, we don't know. We don't know because apparently asking for details is voyeuristic and salacious. Those are words from Rachel Den Hollander on Russell Moore's podcast, as reported by Megan Basham. So last week, Megan Basham went under the Southern Baptist Convention, elites within the Southern Baptist Convention, Big Eva, and they also had some allies over at the Pagan Religious News Service, or RNS. They went on a character assassination attempt on Megan Basham. Megan Basham is a Daily Wire reporter, probably one of the best ones that they have. Certainly the one that speaks to the issues that I've been trying to speak to. She has a much larger platform than the Evangelical Dark Web, but nonetheless, she is doing God's work in reporting on these types of issues. She has done incredible reporting on how the church promoted and took money in promoting Branch Covidianism. She did incredible work exposing Francis Collins for the evil man that he is. So naturally, she would also write and expose the fraud that is the Sex Abuse Task Force report published by Guidepost Solutions, a very left-wing firm. And this is a firm that promotes sexual deviance, and we're trying to ask them to investigate a different kind of sexual deviance. So let's just go over this article that I wrote on Friday evening, and it's SBC circles the wagons defending Jennifer Lyle's survivor status. And let me just read off a few names of some of the biggest names in the Southern Baptist Convention. We have Al Mohler, Danny Aiken, Adam Greenway, Bart Barber. So obviously those are 4 huge names, but those aren't all the names. Going into this article, we got some tweets from Eric Geiger, who's an executive at Lifeway, Bart Barber again. So we got some big names that have really circled the wagons for this, but most of all, this is about Rachel Den Hollander. Now, Megan Basham published an article on the Sex Abuse Task Force report, pointing out the various flaws in the reporting done by Guidepost Solutions. One of the biggest things that she exposed and brought to light was the fact that Jennifer Lyle was Rachel Den Hollander's client against the executive committee, no less. And Jennifer Lyle's lawyer, Rachel Den Hollander, would be on the would play an advisory role to the Sex Abuse Task Force report. while the Southern Baptist Convention would then settle with Jennifer Lyle for over $1 million. This is a blatant conflict of interest that Megan Basham pointed out in her reporting. Let me just pull up her article real quick, because I believe... So, Guidepost and Den Hollander's approach to the question of abuse is one of advocacy, and the company handling Lyle's allegation calls into question how any third-party adjudicators the task force is recommending will handle such difficult cases. And, Den Hollander has suggested that trauma-informed experts like those in Guideposts should be able to judge accusations within the SBC based on preponderance of evidence standards that fall short of what criminal convictions require. Now, there's another part in this that talks about the blatant violation of confidentiality. Some legal experts told me, that's Megan Basham writing, that Den Hollander's previous representation of Lyle represents the against the executive committee made later advisory role to the task force is ethically questionable. And she has a circuit court judge quoted talking about the ethical violations of this, or the questions of this. And this is a major red flag in the task force report that Megan Basham brought to light. Another thing that was largely brought to light is Megan Basham goes into the investigation that Guidepost does, and mostly Guidepost didn't really investigate the Jennifer Lyle situation. What they did do, because all of these witnesses that Megan Basham contacted, Guidepost did not really contact them. Guidepost largely ran with the settled matter that the SBC came to, and that was a process of, we had a conversation and we believed her. And she literally has an email. Megan Basham literally published an email, or posted an email on Twitter, where Bill Cook, who's David Sills' pastor, says, "Yes, I found her allegations credible. Dr. Sills did not confess to me that he had sexually abused her. Many blessings and faithfulness and joy to you." And this was in response to the question. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. This is a follow-up question, because she wants clarification. In the report, when it says that you corroborated Lyle's testimony, you are not saying that David Sills confessed to abuse you, correct? Only that you found her allegations credible. I want to contribute something to the public record that may not be accurate. So, what Megan Basham is asking here is whether the definition of corroborated is the same as you found her accusations credible. And that's what it is. The definition of credible to the Southern Baptist Convention is that they were believed. Or corroboration, I should say. Corroboration is defined as, I talked to her and I believed her. That's not corroboration. Corroboration is offering up evidence, further evidence. Might not be as direct, but it says, okay, these people were here at this time and place. That's corroborating evidence. Or these two had this type of had a professional relationship here. That's corroborating evidence. Or these two people were at, had a picture with holding hands or whatever. That's corroborating evidence. I talked to Jennifer Lyle and believed her is not corroborating evidence. That's hearsay. And Al Mohler, I guess, took a special butthurt to this because his whole thing is hearsay. So, this article by Megan Basham, interestingly enough, was written June 14th, 2022. That begs the question why we're talking about this now. This is almost a month later. This is July 11th that I'm recording this video on. And the reason why we're talking about this now is largely because there's renewed attacks. I mean, Jennifer Lyle is a bitter woman. I heard that she was married during this time. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I mean, if I were her husband, I would hide under a rock too. And considering how unrepentant she is, wouldn't stick around either, because she's building an entire brand off of being a sex abuse survivor when she might have cheated on her husband, but definitely was an adulterous woman for a married man. Like, definitely. So there is so much effort to invested in defending her survivor status. And the thing is, Megan Basham isn't actually calling her not a survivor here. She's just asking questions. I am calling her not a survivor. I am calling her a hoe. But Megan Basham hasn't gone that far. Not yet. But it's pretty clear the effort and the circling of the wagons to stamp out any questions, because apparently asking for details and evidence is salacious and voyeuristic, cannot be tolerated in the Southern Baptist Convention. Never mind what the Proverbs say about one side sounds true until you hear the other side. Never mind that the Proverbs talk about cross-examination as, a standard of gathering evidence. The Southern Baptist Convention is embarrassing. So there is one article that came to mind, and this is a good way to understand what it is, how exactly these liberals think about. And guess what? The Southern Baptist Convention is a liberal denomination. That is why we're even having this conversation, is because they are liberal. They're not drifting liberal. They are liberal. The liberals have already taken over. They are redefining adultery. They don't think adultery is, when a woman cheats, has sex with a married man. That's not adultery anymore. She's grown. She is a grown woman. She is older than my own wife when this started. And guess what? A seminary professor does not have a power dynamic over a student. That's just not true. I don't buy that for a second. So let's read. This is the Religious News Service. They supposedly debunked Megan Basham's claims, but which largely have to do with whether or not this was reported to the police. But they have no date on when this was supposedly reported to the police. So there's no evidence that this was reported to the police in 2018, which is why I believe what Megan Basham asked, and she posted the screenshots of her requesting comment from the police departments, the relevant police departments, and they said they didn't have it. Not that any of this would be chargeable, because again, it's based off hearsay. It's based off a scorned woman, a bitter woman who wasted her sexual prime having sex with a married man. There's a part at the bottom here that I think is of very prominent importance, because this is basically how the Southern Baptist Convention is operating on when it comes to defining sexual abuse. So, a recent message by Georgia pastor Mike Stone, a former SBC presidential candidate, addressed sexual misconduct involving seemingly consenting adults. In it, Stone said a pastor who engages in immorality has abused their authority and has more culpability. But if a grown, competent woman willingly and voluntarily engages with immorality with a pastor or a staff member, he said, she is a grown woman who has engaged in fornication and needs to be called to repent. This is a biblical position. Mike Stone is offering a clear biblical position, like, yes, a pastor should know better. They are called to a higher standard. They will be judged doubly good and doubly bad, I think, the Bible says. Yet that doesn't absolve the other person of sin. So Mike Stone has a completely biblical perspective on this in that quote. Yet this article, this is by religious news service. It's by a very prominent liberal writer. Like, he writes on Julie Royce's website as well. She's a very liberal person, by the way. And then here's who the rebuttal comes from in this article. Is from David Pooler, a professor of social work at Baylor University. Baylor University is an apostate university. Disagrees with that framing. Pooler, who has studied clergy misconduct, said no one wants to redefine sin. No one wants to redefine sin. Instead, he said he and other experts want to define clergy misconduct more accurately. Calling clergy misconduct an affair or a moral failing misses the power dynamics at play, he said. Most helping professions have codes of conduct in place to protect the public from those who would misuse their trust. The guiding principle for any helping profession is a person with more power is always responsible. We're going to put a pin on that one. Poole said that churches often turn against adult survivors of abuse rather than helping them, seeing them as threats to the church rather than beloved members of the community. It's easier to do that than to believe a revered church leader could have acted in abusive ways. Now again, what's actually getting abused when a pastor has an affair and commits adultery? What's actually being abused? In some cases, he could be coercing. But generally speaking, his office is being abused. The other woman is not being abused. Again, I have seen a pastor resign over having an affair. No one called that abuse. No one did. And it's common sense. It was common sense at the time. And there's a tweet by a prominent based, I want to say Southern Baptist, that said, all this hullabaloo is basically about something 99% of people would have called an affair 10 years ago. 99% of people would have called what Jennifer Lyle and David Sills had an affair. An illicit, immoral affair, but nonetheless an affair 10 years ago. But now, because of the Me Too movement, which secular culture has largely moved on from, we're trying to redefine that. We're trying to redefine that. Let me indulge my curiosity, because I feel like I did a video on... Okay, no. I didn't do a video on that guy. So, with that said, that is the Southern Baptist Convention's guiding... it's Bob Smitana. He's the author of this crap post. They're trying to redefine abuse as to power dynamics. But let's go back to the facts of the case. Jennifer Lyle was a Lifeway exec. She was a seminary student. And David Sills is a professor, I believe, of missions, or was, at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. There's no power dynamic there. There isn't. But, along the course of the 12 years, Jennifer Lyle became a Lifeway executive. And David Sills was still a seminary professor. Now, who has more power in this relationship? A Lifeway executive who has publishing power and can advance a seminary professor's career, or a seminary professor who can't even give her a bad grade? This is an embarrassment. It doesn't even fit the cultural Marxist dynamics, but they nonetheless cannot afford to ask questions because there is a grift at work. I don't know what Rachel Den Hollander made on this settlement. Like, I assume that lawyers' cut is like 1/3 of a settlement like that, a $1 million settlement, she gets 1/3 of that. Meanwhile, she's a magnet for everyone else to levy their claims against the executive committee in the Southern Baptist Convention. So she stands to make a lot more money off of this. There's a grift going on, and no one wants to take on Rachel Den Hollander because she's a survivor. No one wants to take on Rachel Den Hollander because she's a woman. No one wants to take on Rachel Den Hollander because she's a lawyer for sex abuse survivors. Real and unreal. Like Jennifer Lyle is not a real sex abuse survivor. No one wants to take her on. The Southern Baptist Convention would rather redefine adultery than call women out for sin. The Southern Baptist Convention would rather redefine adultery than stand up to one woman named Rachel Den Hollander, who, by the way, is on video at the Caring Well Initiative saying that David raped Bathsheba. Anyone who's read that passage in the Bible knows that it wasn't rape, because if it were rape, the language that's used 2 chapters later would have been, for an actual rape, would have been used for David and Bathsheba, but it was not. David committed adultery, but so did Bathsheba. David also committed murder. This is sufficient. We don't need to add sexual abuse to David's count because he didn't do that. It was adultery. The idea of removing the accountability of women is feminism. And this embrace of feminism by the Southern Baptist Convention, like, this isn't average feminism. This is advanced feminism, to quote SpongeBob. Most people in our culture would not view Jennifer Lyle as a sex abuse survivor. They would not. But the Southern Baptist Convention is to the left of most people in our society. And we have a society that's too liberal. But they aren't that liberal. They aren't that liberal. The Southern Baptist Convention is a liberal denomination. And the sooner people realize it, the sooner we can actually build real institutions for missions, church planting that will be a force for good. The Southern Baptist Convention is not a force for good. So let this be another video saying, leave the Southern Baptist Convention. They are a liberal denomination. They are redefining abortion. They don't know what a pastor is. And they will only go downhill from here. The conservatives do not have a majority. They will never have a majority. Because if conservatives aren't waking up to the critical race theory being taught in the seminaries, despite the fact that critical race theory is being talked about on Tucker Carlson's show, they're not going to wake up. Spend your efforts somewhere else. Spend your dollars somewhere else. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Have a blessed day. Let me know what you think about what I think, and I will catch you on the next one.